is one of my favorite leaders,
Just
Barbara
fine.
Leader.
How's my favorite mayor?
Nice to see you
It's
again.
good to see you. I'm looking forward to continuing our tour today.
Oh, I am too, and I think we have perfect weather for it, don't we?
It's beautiful again. We've hit the nail on the head. I don't know
yeah.
how we've dodged the thunderstorms for the last month or so.
We don't want to do it on the weekends, do we? Huh?
No, not with 8 weeks in a row of bad weather on the weekends. Let's take a look at this house we're here in front of. This is the Amos Kendall house.
Yes, this is Amos Kendall house, and it is quite a noted house. You know, a lot of people overlook this place down here, but Amos was highly educated. He graduated from Dartmouth at the head of his class. Yes, he did. He was very smart. He wandered on down to Lexington, Kentucky, and he was a tutor in the home of Henry Clay. He helped educate some of Henry Clay's children. He then went from Lexington over to Georgetown. And at Georgetown, he was editor of one of the newspapers over there and became the postmaster to boot. Then he found out about a very powerful newspaper over here in Frankfort. At that time was named the Western Argus. So he came over here and was one of the editors of the Western Argus. And he became very closely associated with Andrew Jackson. And of course also with Henry Clay, because he was in the home of Henry Clay, you see. So he was a real good friend of both parties, the Clays and the Jacksons, until there was a split between the Clays and the Jacksons. So at that time, then he went with General Jackson, who he had great admiration for. So he stumped hard for Jackson, Andrew Jackson, when he ran for president. And as a reward for his efforts in helping to carry the state and speaking all over the nation, Jackson made him the Postmaster General of the United States, and he served in Jackson's cabinet during his administration. Now, he also, a little bit later, he became telegraph lines, and as a result he became very wealthy, and he made large contributions to charitable organizations and also to churches. As a matter of fact, he was the founder of the asylum for deaf and dumb in Washington, D.C. It later became known as Gallaudet University. And a little bit later he started writing the history of Andrew Jackson, his great friend. But he didn't quite finish it because he passed away in 1869 up in Washington, D.C. But he was a very, very powerful man politically, and as you can see, I imagine it was a terrible thing for him to have to make the decision between Henry Clay, who he had a lot of admiration for Henry Clay, but he seemed to lean a little bit closer to Andrew Jackson.
Any idea what tipped the scales?
Well, I think really he was a little bit more interested in Andrew Jackson because he became politically motivated in Jackson's administration more so than he was in Clay's, because you see Clay, at that time Clay and Crittenden were real close. So I figured that maybe Amos Kendall thought maybe it would be to his advantage maybe to go the other way, because I guess he sort of surmised that Crittenden was probably a little bit, well, I won't say smarter, but was closer to Henry Clay than what he was. So I think that probably was one of the main reasons that he went with Andrew Jackson.
We're going to talk about Mr. Crittenden later today.
Oh, you know, I could talk maybe for a half hour about John J. Crittenden, but we'll wait and save that for a little bit later in this walk, okay?
Okay, let's go. Let's go down the street.
Okay.
Well, just around the corner is a beautiful building. Is this one of the oldest houses in this area?
This is one of the oldest houses in the area. Actually, they say that this house was actually built about 1799. Yes. It was the home of Emily Thomas Tubman. It's called, a lot of people call it the Thomas House. But this lady and lived most of her life here in Frankfort. However, she married a fellow by the name of Richard Tubman, who had a large plantation down in Georgia. He was very fearful of yellow fever, so he told his wife always between June and November to live in Frankfort, Kentucky, which she did the rest of her life, right. But about 1836, after he passed away down in Georgia, why, they had this large plantation that I was telling you about. There was a great movement at that time to send slaves back to Liberia. So she gathered all of the slaves, and there were about 140 slaves that she had down there in Georgia. She gathered them all together and asked them how many would like to be sent back to Liberia. 65 wanted to go back. 75 wanted to stay.
That says something for them, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
They must have been happy.
So many of them wanted to stay. So she spent out of her own pocket over $6,000 to send the 65 back to Liberia. Also, there was one, Barbara, that wanted to come back after a while. So she paid that person's way back to
round trip ticket
round
from Liberia.
That one might have had a lot of good time, and when they went over to Liberia, they said, I believe I like the United States a little bit.
I think Georgia's pretty, huh?
Yeah, that's right. But I like Frankfort a whole lot better. So she was very charitable. She was a great church lady. And so she was quite active in the Christian church, not the one across the street, but the one up on Ann Street. That church in 1870 burned to the ground. 2 years later, Emily Thomas Tubman rebuilt it out of her own funds, even down to the padding on the pews. So she was, the Christian church people, I'm sure, have a lot to be thankful for of Miss Emily Thomas Tubman. Don't you think so?
I think so. That's a lot of money. The money she spent to send the slaves back to Liberia, and then all of that. She must have been a wealthy lady.
She was, and of course her husband was a very large landowner, of course, as I've said, down in Georgia. So she probably was pretty well off, even in those days. But she was a great lady, and as you can see, this is a very beautiful old house, and it is one of the oldest. Actually, I would say Liberty Hall probably is the oldest, but John J. Crittenden House.
Here we go again.
It's quite old, of course, about 1800, and they say this one is 1799.
Now, we're just right across the street, and this house is beautiful. Would you mind telling me a little bit about it?
Oh, yes. This is the Swigart-Taylor house here. And, of course, it was built about 1843 to 1845. And it was the home of Jacob Swigart and also E.H. Taylor, Jr. of the famous distillery, Taylor Distillery, where they made Old Taylor bourbon whiskey. I'm sure you've heard about that.
I have. Was Mr. Swigart an important church builder?
Oh, he certainly was. He was very interested in the Methodist church down here. Also, he was for 33 years clerk of the Court of Appeals. He was very active in politics, and he did help an awful lot to help finance the Methodist church, which is just down the street. Now, a little bit later, of course, E.H. Taylor lived here, the distiller. And he was quite active in politics. As a matter of fact, he was mayor of Frankfort about 1880. Actually, I forgot to tell you that also Jacob Swigart, he had a brother named Philip Swigart. And Philip Swigart was the second president of the Farmers Bank. And Philip Swigart also in 1850 was elected the first mayor of...
The people, after a while, they're going to get used to seeing us out there.
Yeah.
Oh, there's Cable 10.
The city was run by what they called trustees. Some of them were appointed in the early days, and then in later days, the trustees were elected by the people. So old E.H. Taylor was quite a person in his own right. But I must tell you an incident that happened in September of 1881 while he was mayor. It just so happened that a circus was coming to town. And the circus people said that they were not going to pay any tax. There was a tax imposed by the city on any circus that came into Frankfort within the city limits. The circus people were coming, and we're not going to pay the tax. So Taylor, who was mayor at that time, he said, well, I'm going to see to it that they don't unload. So there was great excitement in town. Well, going to be a confrontation between the circus people and the mayor of Frankfort. So he decided that he would take charge of the police. It so happened that the circus people went to the circuit judge, and they had an injunction to stop the mayor and the police force from doing anything about unloading the circus. So, anyway, the mayor decided that he was going to go down there and stop them anyway. He was going to defy the circuit judge. The circuit judge heard about it, and he ordered the sheriff and all of his deputies to go down there and take care of the old mayor, Taylor. The deputies and the sheriff said, look, we're outnumbered. We're not going to go down there and start a confrontation, because Taylor said that anybody that tries to unload the circus train would maybe jeopardize their own lives. So again, the circuit judge heard about this, so he called on the governor, and the governor knew about it, so the governor ordered out the militia, and they came down there, and when they came down there, well, of course, they outnumbered the police and the city police, and the city police disbanded, so the circus did get to come to town after all. But I thought you would be interested in that particular incident that happened during Mayor E.H. Taylor's term of office about, well, actually, that incident happened in 1881, and he was elected a little bit before that time. Isn't that interesting?
That is really interesting, all that to go through for a circus. That's
for
wonderful.
a circus, that's right.
Just around the corner is, it looks like another half of the house that we were actually talking about a minute ago. Is it actually hooked on?
Yes, that's right. This is called a house within a house. Now, this area here was built in 1815 by Dr. Preston Brown.
Now, is he kin to Senator John Brown from Liberty Hall?
Yes, right. You're getting right on with the history.
I'm trying to remember all this as we go on around town.
Well, yes, he was a brother of Senator Brown, and this is where he lived. He built this place in 1815. Now, the first part of this house, as you can see where the call it the front end now. We just talked about it. It's the Swigart-Taylor house. Mm-hmm. It was added on later, see, about 1843 to 1845. But this area here was built in 1815. Now, you can also notice in the back there, Barbara, mm-hmm. where there is another part of the house, which was added on later as the servants' quarters. So this house does have a lot of history to it, and it's called the house within a house.
That's really interesting. I can't believe all this addition, and still it functions as one.
Oh, yes. It's just been a beautiful house. I knew very well the two old maids that lived here, the Negus sisters. One of them has passed away not too many years ago, and there's one sister left, but she's not in very good health. But she's a very fine lady. I want to emphasize that point. Now, just across the street, Barbara, you know.
We finally reached the Crittenden house.
We're finally going to cross the street and talk about John J. Crittenden, okay?
Okay, we better pull up a chair for this one.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, here we are, and here's a nice step for us to sit down on. Tell me all about John J. Crittenden. Was he one of the greatest statesmen of Kentucky?
You know, Barbara, I could talk for an hour maybe on John J. Crittenden.
A special edition of the Walking Tour of Frankfort.
Yes. This house was built about 1800. It was on matter of fact, Barbara, his mother was named, before she got married, Judith Harris, and she was a second cousin of Thomas Jefferson. You remember how Thomas Jefferson fills in there? There he was, a good friend of John Brown's, and gave him a lot of ideas about building the Liberty Hall, you know. So, and of course, Thomas Jefferson also visited down there, you know, in Liberty Hall. But anyway, John J. Crittenden, the family moved to Woodford County, and then in the early days he went down to Russellville. He became interested in politics, and he ran for the legislature and won. He was Speaker of the House several times. He was 5 times United States Senator from Kentucky. He was Governor of Kentucky. He was twice appointed Attorney General of the United States. So you can see how well thought of he was. He was, in my estimation, of course, most people think that Henry Clay was the greatest statesman that Kentucky ever produced. And I'm not going to argue that point, but I tell you, I think that John J. Crittenden surely runs a very close second. If it was talking about the Kentucky Derby, I would say maybe Clay over Crittenden by a nose.
I think so, because all the
and Crittenden lived about the same time, and maybe that's another reason. Clay had more opportunities maybe than Crittenden did. I don't know about that, however. But Clay was a very, very good friend of Crittenden's. And they worked together, and Crittenden worked hard for Clay almost every time that he ran for president, and he ran for president several times, except in 1848. In 1848, Crittenden saw that Clay didn't have a chance to win. This was his last round. But Clay, even though Crittenden told him he didn't think that he had a chance to win the presidency, but Clay took a tour up through Ohio and bottom part of Illinois, and he was received by enthusiastic crowds, and he felt like that he still had a very good chance to win the presidency. So he decided that he would go ahead and run anyway. But it was too bad, because actually they had been friends all these years, and Crittenden had always helped him out. As a matter of fact, he'd stepped aside many times in favor of Clay so that Clay could be promoted in any of his endeavors that he did seek. But it was a sort of a sad thing, I think, that they finally split there in 1845, when actually Crittenden decided that he thought that Zachary Taylor of Louisville had a better chance to win. So he went with Taylor. So Zachary Taylor, he was a great friend of Zachary Taylor's, and Henry Clay became quite upset about it. He held a grudge against Crittenden for the rest of his life until I shouldn't say the rest of his life, but on his deathbed, Crittenden finally went to see him, and they finally, on Clay's deathbed, they made up and became friends. Also, you know, Crittenden is known for his many acts that he helped pass in the United States Senate. And of course, I guess one of the greatest acts that he's known for was the Crittenden Compromise. He tried desperately to avert the Civil War. And in December of 1860, why, he introduced in the United States Senate what was called at that time the Crittenden Compromise. His bill that he introduced was to extend the Missouri line all the way to the west coast. Any state that was above that line would be free states, and any below that line would be slave states. Also in his bill, it said that if the majority of the people vote to remain slave states or free states, that's it. That's the way that they would be entered into the Union of the United States of America. But unfortunately, the bill was turned over to what was called the Committee of 13. And about a week later, after his bill was introduced, why, they defeated it. A lot of the radicals in Congress didn't want to even consider it. So he was very, very disappointed. And of course, right after that, here comes the Civil War, and the rumblings in Kentucky were real strong. Brer McGoffin was governor at that time. He leaned toward the Confederacy, but the Union forces, they controlled the legislature. So as a matter of fact, you probably know that Brer McGoffin finally resigned after a compromise was worked out. And James F. Robinson succeeded him as governor of Kentucky. As a matter of fact, there was a fellow that was the president of the Senate that was next in line to McGoffin, but was not acceptable to McGoffin. So he told the senators that if they could work out a compromise, that Robinson would be made the Speaker of the Senate. Why, that would be acceptable to him, and that he would resign, and then Robinson would then become governor. And that's exactly what happened. The Speaker of the Senate resigned. The senators elected Robinson as the Speaker. With that, why, McGoffin resigned, Robinson became governor, and immediately they re-elected the person that had been the president of the Senate. So it was all worked out. So I'm just reviewing that a little bit for you to show you how this state, Kentucky, was a border state. Actually, 40,000 troops went to the south, and 60,000 troops went north and joined the Union forces. Now, Crittenden himself didn't want Kentucky to leave the Union. So he was quite upset. He fought desperately to have Kentucky remain neutral and to avert the Civil War. But Lincoln was seeing none of that. Lincoln sent word to McGoffin before he resigned. He said he wanted 15,000 troops from Kentucky to join the Union. Well, McGoffin sent a telegram back, and he said that there was no way that he would send a man or any money to subdue his sister southern states. That's the way Brer McGoffin felt. So anyway, it was the state was divided. It was brother against brother in many, many cases. In my own case, my grandfather was on the Union side, but he had a brother that went south and joined the Confederate side. And in John J. Crittenden's case, he had two sons. One, George B. Crittenden, he graduated from West Point, and he was a major general in the Confederate forces. And he had a brother named Thomas Crittenden. He joined the Union forces, and he was a major general on the Union side. So you can see how split up the parties were. It is said, and this is strictly hearsay, that when there was going to be a great battle down in Tennessee, John J. Crittenden, the night before the battle, he was able to get a little flag of truce, and he met with both of his sons before that battle. Isn't that something?
That's interesting.
I just think that John J. Crittenden, in my book, was one of the most famous men that Kentucky ever did produce. And while we're talking about it, isn't this nice and cool to sit here? And you know where this stone came from?
Where?
This stone came from one of the original steps of one of the early capitals of Kentucky. That's prior to 1830, because the old Capitol building that's standing now down there on Broadway was built in 1830. So this step was saved from one of the early capitals that burned. We had two capitals down there on that site. Both of them burned. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But this that we're sitting on, it's nice and cool on a hot day, too.
It does.
Feels good, doesn't it, huh? Well, I thought that you'd be interested. I know we've talked a long time about John J. Crittenden, but let's go on down the street now and talk about something else.
Okay, let's go. This is our last house on today's tour. Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, it's a very famous house, Barbara. This house was the home of Thomas L. Crittenden.
Was he kin to John J. Crittenden?
Yes, he was the son of John J. Crittenden. And of course, as I've said up on the corner a while ago, he was a major general in the Union forces. He later became, about 1866, he became treasurer of the state of Kentucky. Also, you might be interested, this house was built originally in the early 19th century, and it was also used by the James Garrett family. Now, James Garrett was the second governor of Kentucky. And you know, he succeeded himself in office. He is the only governor, James Garrett was the only governor to serve 2 successive 4-year terms. How about that?
That's interesting.
There are 4 governors actually that have served 2 terms. Of course, Isaac Shelby was the first governor of Kentucky, and he was followed immediately by James Garrett, the second governor of Kentucky. Then Isaac Shelby came back to serve, about 1816, I think it was. And then after that, we have James B. McCreary that served 2 terms at 2 different times. And then the 4th governor, of course, is A.B. Happy Chandler, who served 2 different terms as governor of Kentucky. So the Garrett family... But also, this house, I remember quite well when, before it was restored. It was going to be purchased by a fine young man here in Frankfort when it was up for sale. And it looked like he was going to buy it, but the state came along and said, look, this has so much history to it. We will purchase the house and we'll restore it and we'll use it from time to time for some state departments. I believe it was the Arts, Department of the Arts, that stayed here for a while. But it was in 1973, and we're very thankful for the state of Kentucky for coming along and saving this very historic place. It was lived in by the Garretts and the Crittendens.
And next week we're going to look at some stake facilities, correct?
Yes. The next trip we'll go down to the old Capitol building. We'll make arrangements to go inside. I want you to be sure and see the spiral staircase, which is the only one of its kind in the United States, fully unsupported. Also, I thought it would be nice to go around and visit the old governor's mansion, which actually is the home of the lieutenant governors now. But 33 governors of Kentucky have lived in that house down there.
Well, that's a lot of history.
Just across the street are the remains of the old penitentiary that was torn down after the flood in 1937.